this just opened up a very interesting door for San Antonio, as recent reports out of Cleveland indicate that one of their better shooters and versatile swingman is up for trade this season on a very reasonable contract. There's been a lot of teams that have reportedly checked in on him, and he makes a lot of sense for San Antonio. We got to dive into that, plus also a report out of Europe about a former Spurs star who's looking to make a return to the NBA behind the bench, and San Antonio could very well be a front runner. A lot of great stuff coming up on this episode of Spurs Digest. But hey, before we talk about that, I got to take a pause and just say, we've been getting asked where we got these shirts and sweaters. Dylan Harper, Wemby, Manu, even on our stream, we got people talking about it, but we've partnered with Die Hard Addicts, and I'm not kidding when I say I've tried a bunch of Spurs merch. Look, I mean, I got this hat, I got the jersey from the Spurs store, but this stuff right here is the stuff that I love wearing out more than anything. It's 100% cotton. It's made in Texas as well, which is extremely rare for any kind of merch, and you can get so many designs, including these with Timmy, Manu, the Admiral, Wemby, so many other things. And the coolest thing is that you have a 10% off code just for watching the show. Code DIGEST in the link down below at Die Hard Addicts will get you 10% off any of this merch, anything you see on the website. And again, like I said, I've tried a lot of Spurs merch, and if you are looking to get something to start the season, something you can wear out and feel confident wearing out that you know is going to be high quality, check out Die Hard Addicts. The link is in the pinned comment and the description down below. Don't forget to use Digest to let them know we sent you. Get 10% off. Let's get into this video, and I want to start with an NBA legend. No, it's not Manu. It's part of the other big three, and it's Tony Parker. Now, this headline's in French. I do speak French. For those of you French-speaking people, you can read that. Otherwise, I'll translate. Basically, Asvel, the team which he's a president of, it's looking like the end of their history is coming up soon, but the dream to return behind an NBA bench is getting closer. And this is in French and English here, but for those of you who can read French, can read it in French, but in English, Parker is age 43, began training this summer to become a coach, already dreaming of a position in the NBA, a role that is incompatible with that of president, because he's been president of Asvel. And I don't know too much about what's going on there. Maybe some French fans can tell me, but it seems like a lot of people are surprised that Asvel lasted as long as it did. But at the end of the day, Tony Parker wants to return behind an NBA bench as a coach. And naturally, everyone is saying, why not San Antonio, right? Because the big three is such a huge part of Spurs culture. I mean, I don't need to say that. We all know that already. But to have Tony Parker behind the Spurs bench to join the already what I would consider very, very solid coaching staff of Mitch Johnson, to be working under our president, Gregg Popovich, right? President of basketball, like, this would work so well. I mean, Timmy's been around a little bit. We've seen him on the bench. He's coached, right? This kind of stuff. Manu, not officially a coach, but he's been there working this summer with the Spurs in some capacity. But to have a guy behind the bench every night could be very interesting. Now, again, like, there is that path of NBA point guards to go into management or go straight behind the bench. I mean, Jason Kidd, Steve Nash, like, there's so many guys. Isaiah Thomas was not a great GM, but you know what I mean? These kind of guys like to go and work in the NBA again. And I think Tony Parker, like, I don't imagine he'll get head coaching gigs right away. That's often not how it works. But imagine him under Mitch Johnson, Sean Sweeney, or the newly brought in guy. We got Corliss Williamson. We got our coach of the year from Austin coming up as well, to add some of that air of that legacy in San Antonio behind the bench with Tony Parker. I think would just give, not that we need more credit, but it would just give that vibe of like, this is an institution. Spurs basketball runs deep in your blood, and I think it just makes sense. Like, if you look at coaching staffs around the league, what team makes more sense than San Antonio? If he goes to Charlotte, I'm going to lose my mind, because anyway, I'm not even going to get into that, but I just like to imagine it, right? Mitch Johnson at the helm. We got so much experience on the bench to balance out the ideologies, and then bringing in Tony Parker, a guy who has been through this Spurs system for the better part of his life, the guy who was finals MVP, the guy who was an all-star for the San Antonio Spurs. I think it just makes a ton of sense. Let me know your thoughts on Tony Parker wanting to return behind an NBA bench in some kind of coaching capacity, because I think if there's a fit, it is in San Antonio. So let me know your thoughts, but I want to move on to the big thing here today, and that's some trade talk out of Cleveland. And I'm going to bring up the quote here from Brett Siegel. We'll actually make it full screen. Phew, there it is. All right, so you can see Dean Wade there on the left. So one player who finds himself in an interesting situation in Cleveland that many teams are monitoring entering the new year is Dean Wade. Well, new year, I should say, not year, but regardless. Multiple teams called the Cavs this offseason before free agency began, inquiring about Wade's availability. And it's very interesting because Dean Wade is one of those guys who played a good amount of minutes, but he's a low usage guy. He's surprisingly versatile as a defender. Like, I think he kind of gets pegged as a guy who can't really play that much defense by some people, but he actually is really not that bad. But you can look at, again, 21.2 minutes a game, 5 points, 4 rebounds. He's a 6'9 swingman, can play the 3, can play the 4. He can kind of do a bit of it all. And his 3-point percentage this past year was not great at 36%, but over his career, he's at 37%. And, when you think about the San Antonio Spurs, you think, well, what do we need? I think a swingman that can really shoot the ball is one of these big needs, especially as we move forward with this team in the next few years. Of course, right now, we still have Harrison Barnes, who is very capable of doing that role, but Dean Wade could also fit that role, though in a lower volume capacity. He only took 4.5 shots per game this year, 3.8 of them were threes. But this year was a bit of a down year. You can see in 23-24, very, very similar usage, very similar amount of games, very similar amount of minutes. He shot 39.1% from 3. And again, when we look at his stats here, all of his threes this past year were assisted. 82% of his shots were threes. 100% of his threes are assisted. He is a spot-up shooter who can be a bit versatile, grab some boards, play a little bit of defense if you need him to. But that's what he's there to do, knock down some threes. And if we just take a look at the Spurs lineup, there is kind of a gaping hole, right, in terms of guys who are just straight-up spot-up shooters. Champagny can, right? But he is a little bit inconsistent. And again, he's more of a guard and he can play the 3, but he's more of a 2/3, whereas Wade, I think, is more of a 3/4. And especially with guys like Harrison Barnes being an expiring contract, even Kelly Olynyk is also an expiring contract. You have to wonder, like, how are the Spurs going to replace these shooters? Because shooting is going to be very important for the future of this team. We talk about this all the time, how important shooting is going to be. I think, again, it's not going to be as bad as some people say, but it is a concern. So losing a couple of guys potentially in free agency this upcoming year could spell, I don't want to say disaster, but it could be a problem. And if we just take a look at Dean Wade, the good thing here is that he's on a $6.6 million contract. He's like an MLE level contract, right? So if the Spurs were to make some kind of move, it'd be very easy to bring him in. But that brings me to my bigger point. And the very interesting door that this opens is that we know San Antonio has taken a shift recently in terms of, being patient with this rebuild thing into like, let's go and try to win. The De'Aaron Fox trade was a win now move. The extension, signing him a day after he was eligible to sign the extension, was like, let's get this done. This is our core. This is what we're doing going forward. To me, that signals that if another trade that could benefit the Spurs long-term comes up this year, hey, why not do it? And a trade like that, breaking the voice because I'm getting so excited, would involve almost certainly, again, if it's a big name player, someone like a Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson, Jeremy Sochan. I don't want to say he's going to be gone. But again, Keldon Johnson, Devin Vassell are the two guys that we often talk about, right? And so if that's the case, if we're not bringing in a small forward in return, or maybe we are, but we have to give up some of that, wing depth, bringing in a guy, not necessarily exactly Dean Wade, but like Dean Wade, who can play the 4, who can play some of the 3, can just be a spot-up shooter, that to me is a perfect fit, especially with this contract, right? Say you bring in a bigger name and you bring them into the team and you need some like bench depth, some guy who can just come in and shoot the 3 ball. This is kind of fitting that exact bill, right? And Cleveland, who's in a very interesting salarial situation right now with Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Mobley, Allen, so many interesting things going on in Cleveland. He's expendable, and that's why we've heard that he is, teams have been monitoring. The Houston Rockets were actually the closest to getting him. There's been a lot of talk about the Rockets and Dean Wade, even way back in July, I think, of this year, there was talks. But again, a lot of teams checking in because who wouldn't want a guy putting up these kind of numbers on that kind of contract? A reliable shooter who's a little bit versatile, who's okay playing 15 to 20 minutes in a bench role at an MLE level deal. To me, it just makes too much sense, right? So I'm not saying that this is a fit at this exact moment for this Spurs roster because let's be honest, looking at this, where does he play now, right? Like there's no room for him. But I'm saying if a trade does end up happening this season for the Spurs, where we end up giving up a few roster players in return for maybe a bigger star, who knows if that's going to happen, but I would never say never, a guy like Dean Wade actually is a perfect fit to bring in on a low cap hit, even if you're up there in the first apron, whatever, you can still do this, right? You can still bring in an MLE level guy. It makes a lot of sense, but I want to hear what you guys have to say. This is not something that's going to be imminent, not something that's going to happen in the next week or two, but it's something to absolutely monitor as the season goes on. These underrated bench pieces that could fill in gaps that maybe you'd lose if you have to move some guys out. So let me know your thoughts on that down below, but that'll do it for this episode of Spurs Digest. If you enjoyed, leave a like, comment, subscribe to the channel, and if you want to get some of this, like, again, amazing merch. I love this stuff. Amazing shirts, sweaters. Check out the link down below in the description or the pinned comment. Use code DIGEST to get 10% off your order, which is really, really awesome. Thank you so much for watching. I've been your host, Josh Gosse, and I'll catch you in the next one.